Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. My name is Georgiana Uhlyarik. I am the Frederick S. Eaton Curator of Canadian Art. And along with Wanda Nanabush, who is the Curator of Indigenous Art, we co-lead the recently created Indigenous and Canadian Art Department at the Art Gallery of Ontario. We come to you from the territory of the Anishinaabe, also the territory of the Wendat and the summer home of the Seneca. It is a territory around the Great Lakes. It's shared with the Haudenosaunee in an agreement to share the beautiful and bountiful resources around this lovely land. I am very, very honored to be able to live and thrive on this beautiful land so very far away from my own. I am joined by Diane Borsato, who is a Toronto artist who has an incredible practice collaborating with a number of fascinating people. Her practice has taken her across the country as well as internationally, creating projects that we're going to hear a little bit more about, as well as a recent project, not so recent, maybe about a decade or so, with Amish Morel working on the outdoor school. She's also an associate professor of experimental studio at University of Guelph. Welcome, Diane.
Hi, Georgiana. I'm so happy to be here and honored. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. So I think I'll start by asking you where you are, since you are in an incredible space. I can see that.
You know, I have to say, I didn't edit it, but I am at home. I'm at home and I work in my studio from home. And so I'm here in my studio. I can show you a picture of a wider view here. So if that's working, and you can see where I am. You know, I was looking around my studio thinking about how I might explain all this. And, you know, it's really an office. It's kind of a site of administration and communication for me and teaching and things, because most of my art practice actually does happen, you know, in relationship with other people, naturalists and artists and dancers and things, and in a more like site responsive way. So, you know, directly in the world and outdoors, but this is sort of mission control.
It's always such a privilege to be able to be in an artist space, because they really are all very different, and you really get to see not only something about their practice, but something about their personality. You know, I've been in studios that are so meticulous, you think, how is it possible? You have a slightly different approach.
Yeah, I guess reflective of my mind, you know, I collect things, and I have artworks from friends and things in progress, things I'm still thinking about, you know, lots of books. And so it's a cluttered kind of open, easygoing, workspace full of stuff.
Well, today we are actually marking a particular occasion. On May 7th, 1920, it was the very first time that the group of seven exhibited together as a group at the Art Gallery of Toronto, as it was called then. And when you were artist in residence at the AGO in 2013, you came across a quote that used to be part of our installation, part of Transformation AGO. And I remember you and I speaking about it at the time, because you were quite taken by it, as a quote by Fred Hauser. Fred Hauser was the first kind of chronicler of the group of seven, and he spoke about this new type of artist, you know, and he created this rather heroic image of an artist. And I'm going to read the quote so that I don't get it wrong. So this is from 1926. And in describing this new type of artist, he says that this artist puts on the outfit of the bushwhacker and prospector, closes with his environment, paddles, portages, and makes camp, sleeps in the out of doors, under the stars, climbs mountains with his sketchbox on his back. And I think that everyone is going to be able to see that there are some elements in there that really relate directly to the kind of practice that you have. But I know that in 2013, we were able to actually install your version of that field pack of what that would have looked like. So can you tell us a little bit about that? And also about today, like, you know, thinking how we cannot even go outside. Maybe if we're lucky and we have a backyard, we can go there, seeing our neighbors, maybe again, sightings of humans across the street. how are you thinking about going outside, especially as the project you're really embedded in these days is the outdoor school?
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that quote in the gallery and I really loved it. Like I kind of wished I could relate to it. I wished it was true, but inevitably I was thinking about like, what's the new type of artist? And, definitely she might be a she, she might not be this romantic outdoorsman doing brave and like intellectually significant things in the wild, Of course, those were ideas of their time, and it did prompt me to think about like what's in my pack, and as an artist now, the first thing I thought of is my pack is full of snacks and a sun hat and stuff that I need to like take care of other people because I'm not by myself. I take care of a little kid, at least for the last decade. And, I also get really lost. I'm not like a very accomplished bushwhacker. And so I suffer the flies and things like that. And so I don't feel particularly heroic about this environment all the time. So I have people taking care of me too, leading me around and teaching things. And so, when I think about being outdoors, like for me, it's a lot more uncertain and, it's communal and humbling in all kinds of ways. I'm just confronted with so many things I don't know and understand. And that's exciting. And also when I'm outside, inevitably there's tremendous grief about a history of, the land and the environment in the country, and also worry, about the environment and the future. And so, for me, I think being outdoors is about, noticing things, bringing my curiosity, learning things, rather than like making any, masterful declarations in any medium. And I'm just showing a photo. I included this one thinking about this because it's an image of my partner, Amish Morel, and my son. We were leading a mushroom foray for the Doris McCarthy Gallery, which we do every year with the exception of the previous year. But it's always something very communal and, a kind of jam of knowledge and experience and stories and, a lot more complicated than being under the stars, communing in this romantic way. I wish it was, maybe.
Well, you always bring people together, so there's also an element of chance, right? Especially when you have these participants that gather and you do lead them through something that may not right away feel like art. You were speaking about this mushroom foray, and so you're always, I find, surprised and delighted by the kinds of knowledge that other people bring and how actually that ends up informing the event and how you think about it. And really is this, in learning, it's always both ways, right? This is the idea of a school.
Yeah. And I'm definitely, in my art projects, like I'm definitely not the teacher, I sort of greedily, enlist people who know a lot more than I do about stuff and walk with them. And, we exchange whatever we've got, whatever tools we have. And, for me, it's more about like creating situations where we practice certain ways of being in the world and outside. And for me, the social dimension is actually really important.
And speaking about learning and how we get to know things, also during this time that you were at the AGO, and you and I have spoken about this in the past, is that you kind of bypass the official Canadian art history story, that many of us were either taught in school and in fact, you kind of discovered your very own path through the second floor of the AGO that we all miss so very much, not being able to be in this building. So you went upstairs and you saw primarily members of the group and their exhibition and their works on view. And because you didn't have this quote unquote baggage, if you like, of how they were taught, in fact, you found your very own way through it. And as curator of Canadian art, I'm often asked of their legacy. And I think of your project, the Cloud Party, which you did, I think in September 2017, as a really evocative response to this question that I'm often posed. You really did kind of figure out a very unique way to go through these works of art and these artists. So tell us what you did.
The baggage, you know. I hate to admit actually that I just didn't, maybe I just didn't see myself in some of those stories about this, you know, group of very important Canadian artists. And, you know, I just didn't really belong in some of these stories. And in some ways it creates a kind of fraught relationship to things from our history, to like the whole second floor of the museum. It's like a sort of bad memories of, you know, art school when I was really young. And that didn't seem right, because of course, like, who doesn't like landscapes and trees and, you know, skies and flowers and things like that. Like, I knew that this could mean more to me than, you know, maybe just that one framework like didn't work. So you're talking about a project when the Creative Time did a summit at the AGO and invited me to do a piece in the museum. And so I was thinking about clouds, because I had recently joined the Cloud Appreciation Society, which is a pretty funny, it almost seems like performance art, but I don't think it is. It's a pretty funny club, like internationally, invented by this, this guy. You can join and be a cloud appreciator. You can get a little patch. I have my patch here. Do you see? Cloud Appreciation Society. And so you can practice like identifying clouds. And so I just found this image on the internet of like a typical, very basic cloud map, you know. And so you can see the names of the different kinds of clouds, you know, depending where they are in the atmosphere and things like that. And there's something delightful about being able to name and see meteorological phenomenon and optical effects. And, you know, the Cloud Appreciation Society manifesto is that, you know, the sky is nature's most egalitarian of displays. And, you know, it's sort of for everyone all the time. And, you know, the more I got into like obsessive cloud appreciating and identifying, you know, not only was it like distracting when I was driving to work, but, you know, I walked through the second floor of the museum, and by the paintings that I sometimes admit I run by, and I kind of realized, like, wait a second, you know, there's some altocumulus, or there's, you know, a cumulonimbus. And so I, you know, I thought about this kind of alternate tour that you could have, as opposed to the official, you know, tour of the Canadian collection, especially those historic paintings. Why don't I just do like a meteorological tour and lead a kind of real live cloud identifying workshop, you know, where we look at clouds and atmospheric effects, and like just use meteorological tools to interpret the collection. And so I just like ignored the art historical narratives, which was a secret delight, and you know, ignored the nationalistic stories, and ignored, you know, I never even said Lauren Harris once, and instead it was like all about, you know, crepuscular rays and, you know, cumulus clouds and nacreous and diamond dust and halos and things like that. And so, I mean, it was a kind of fake docent tour where it was as if we weren't in the museum at all. It was as if we were in the wild. We were in the world. And, you know, I started to realize that I could look at abstract sculpture and painting and even talk about that as if they were clouds. And, you know, I could say cumulus is this wide relative to this high. And, you know, the participants in the workshop actually started to develop some skills, and they could identify which Henry Moore sculptures were which kind of cloud. And, you know, once you have these goggles on, you see everything in terms of meteorology, and like abstract painting, you know, was like perfect for describing clouds. And we even saw during the tour a total eclipse of the sun, you know, full totality. And it was a bit emotional, actually, like to behold this work that way. And, you know, we eventually, you know, I was talking to a group of very, you know, informed, you know, artists and activists and academics, and no one knew why the sky was blue. So we talked about how the sky is blue and full of water, and how we're all in it together. And then finally, at the end of the tour, we went outside and we had a look to see if looking at art could also teach us about life.
What I've always loved about your practice is that with very subtle and very sort of gentle shifts in a way, you get us to reconsider all received knowledge in a way and find brand new ways. And in that way, we can get excited all over again about something that has become so familiar that perhaps we don't even see it anymore, you know? So
Yeah,
it's this idea that you sort of, you bring these tools, and in this case, sort of the naturalist tools, into the museum. And you've done this on another occasion for Nuit Blanche project, where you actually began working with beekeepers. And this is the other thing I love about your practice, is that, like, I would have never imagined that there would be a cloud appreciation society. But if ever I need to know if there is a society for anything, you are the person to ask.
Yeah, I would say, like, this is a great privilege of being an artist, is I can sort of follow any lines of curiosity, you know, and because I don't just like learning things from YouTube videos, and, you know, I like to join clubs and talk to people who are really invested. I love amateur experts and experts, and I wish I could commit, but I have lots of them. But yeah, and I forgot to mention too that, you know, because I was using these tools, I could see the whole collection. I noticed things like there was no rain in Canada. You know, on the entire second floor, there's no painting of rain, for example. And so it's actually like a critical tool too. So you see things that maybe are not visible, you know, omissions, you know, a kind of mischievous way into critical insights in the collection too. But you're asking about your temper, my weather. And so I should precede that by talking a little about apiary videos, because this research kind of informed the big piece that ended up at the AGO. So for this project, I've been a beekeeper for many, many years, and again, part of a lot of clubs. I'm considered, I get, you know, letters every year from the Ministry of Agriculture because I'm a beekeeper. But, you know, it's inevitable when I'm part of these practices that sometimes I think I'm just going to do this as a hobby, but I can't help but like bring an artist's sensibility and questions, and I just can't stop sort of applying that to wherever I am. And so a lot of artists have made projects with honey and beeswax and with bees, and I love these projects and these artists. But one thing that I was really, really impressed by and fascinated about were actual beekeepers themselves. I felt like they were a special category of human with like special powers in a way. You know, when you get to know very serious, very committed amateur beekeepers, like it's very impressive and beautiful to watch them tend to their bees. Like they move very slowly and calmly. You know, it's almost like watching someone do Tai Chi or something. And it has this effect on their 80,000 stinging insects of calming their bees. And so there's this beautiful reciprocity like that. It's a kind of, you know, embodied knowledge and an intelligence, a choreography that's just like so incredible and sort of powerful that I was really thinking about exploring that. And so I visited different beekeepers in urban apiaries in Toronto, and I talked to them about this special effect that they can produce with their movement and their calm, and asked them to just like perform that for the camera. I wasn't entirely sure what it would look like, but this is a series of short videos, and this is a piece I'm so thrilled is part of the AGO collection now, where the different beekeepers are sitting with their bees in their apiaries on rooftops. You know, you hear the city around them, and you know, it's very much about like a presence and you know, listening, and you know, it's a very gentle practice, and it does kind of like affect all beings around one, you know, when you're doing this kind of thing. And so I tried that out and thought a lot about this in the city. And then when I was a resident at the museum and I had to do a Nuit Blanche performance, I was obsessed with the idea that I could make like a big flashy spectacle for Nuit Blanche, which is what's so great about Nuit Blanche, except that it would be silent or very quiet. And so I thought about, well, if one beekeeper can calm 80,000 bees, maybe 100 beekeepers might like calm the whole city, you know, might change the air in the museum. Like I didn't know what effect that might have, like 100 beekeepers at once. And so luckily I had been participating in a lot of clubs and societies and things and had some trust and some relationships. I spent a good year schmoozing Ontario beekeepers and students of beekeeping and like lovers of pollination and things like that, and getting people to agree to do performance art. So this was actually a 5-hour performance where it was almost like a sit-in where the beekeepers came and again sort of practiced this kind of stillness. And it turned out that this is kind of a long, complicated way to something that looks a lot like meditation. And so I worked with a couple of meditation instructors because 5 hours of this kind of stillness is actually something of an athletic feat. And so we did a sequence of like sitting and walking, you know, practicing stillness and seeing if we could literally like change the air, you know, with our temperaments. And you know, I don't know if that happens in a sort of literal way or if it's a symbolic way, like changing our minds about environmental policies and, you know, the conditions that affect our shared future. And
there's a way in which, you know, you spoke about the silence, but the way in which you kind of amplify silence, you know. So
that's
these,
so nice.
Yeah, these two things that may not necessarily come together. You know, I love the work you've done with museums because you also get into the inner structures of them, you know. And also you love experts and their understanding of things. And you did this fabulous project that's really less for sharing, more for experiencing for the conservators at the AGO, where you drank tea from cups that have not been in use in a long time. But I think about the way in which contemporary artists, and especially this kind of practice that you are so very skilled at, is my dog is trying to get in, is what's happening, and I'm being distracted.
Is he good with cats? Because
I know you have cats. Is that actually conservators, it changes their own practice, right? Because this work comes in the collection, or you ask them a question that challenges, again, the way in which things are always done. And so then they have to say, okay, well, so if the artist practice, at the core of their practice, this is their intent, how does my practice as a conservator shift? And Sherry Phillips, who is one of my favorites, although I love all the conservators, she actually had to become a beekeeper in order to care for one of the collections, one of the works in our collection. So I always think about, you know, the way in which artists kind of push all of us to think about new ways in which we can do things.
Oh, that's the Pierre Hugues piece, right? I love that piece. Wonderful. Yeah. I didn't know she had to do that. That's great.
Yeah. But, she also had to, I think, at one point get a rifle license for a different piece in the collection. So that's like,
isn't that awesome commitment? Like, I love that contemporary art presents these, like, that is the new, you know, right? Conservator. Yeah, just thinking about experts. I mean, I think there's a certain advantage for me not to be an expert at anything, and like I can kind of bring an irreverence about traditions and expectations and the kind of weight of how things should be, you know, being a sort of tourist in a way into practices and disciplines is like kind of a rich perspective, you know, and you can imagine other possibilities. And so for me, it's been, that's my excuse anyway, why I've never been expert at anything.
When I've heard you speak about this before, about sort of finding these either amateur experts or experts, so you've worked with museum conservators and mushroom keeper, you know, dancers, astronomers, and I like the way in which you always say to yourself, I'm just going to take a break from my practice and I'm going to go and do some mushrooming, you know, and then you kind of go, oh, but inevitably, the artist comes along with your with your collaborations with people from different disciplines.
Yeah, maybe I'll show you these two pieces with mushrooms. But
exactly, because they're outside of the museum, but they're also different kinds of collections.
Mm-hmm. You know, these are older works, but I still think about them a lot because I think, you know, there are works in one's personal practice that you return to, that you see as like, you know, an opening into a whole new way of working. And like these two mushroom pieces that I'll show now, you know, you're right. Like when I started, you know, I never thought of myself as a naturalist until I started becoming obsessed with mushrooms and mushrooming. And that was about 12 or 13 years ago now. And one of the first projects I did, you know, I did think of it as like a break from art, to just like walk in the forest and curious about, you know, edible mushrooms and things like that. But as I got more and more into this hobby and this practice, and inevitably, you know, brought artistic, you know, insights and, you know, concerns and questions about it, I just found so much like richness and possibility in it. You know, this very, very slow practice of noticing things, of seeing, you know, intensely, using all your senses, of like discovering unseen worlds, you know, whole kingdoms that you never noticed before, that you kind of step on. And, you know, seeing beauty in things that are like reviled and, you know, growing in like rot and shit and things like that, like actually finding marvelous, strange, sculptural, you know, fantastical creatures. And then I do love naming of species and creatures. And I don't mean just like Latin botanical, but like common names and names in other languages, which like tell us so many stories about our fears, like our desires, our relationships to other creatures and to each other. And so for me, like, you know, this practice became really, really interesting for me. And so this one project that I'll show you now, the Chinatown Foray, which is performed in 2008 and then again in New York City, I invited the Mycological Association, you know, my buddies in the Mushrooming Club, to go on a mycological foray in the Chinese supermarkets and medicinal shops. And when I proposed this to them, you know, because I had been in Chinatown one day in a rainstorm and in the medicinal shops thinking like, wow, I think there's lots of fungus here, but I need some help like communicating and sort of identifying, and I'm curious what they're used for. And so a lot of the members of the Mycological Society speak Chinese, and we're really excited about this idea. So instead of going in the forest, we went to the supermarket, and we went to the medicinal shops, and the whole field, the whole Mycological Society, we did a foray like in the stores, and we brought our field guides and our baskets and our magnifying glasses, and it was really wonderful because, you know, someone could interpret the names and someone could talk about how to cook them, and another member would share, you know, their translations that they worked on overnight, and we had dim sum and identified our species and things like that. And I kind of like how it messed with the idea of local species. Like all of our field guides were all messed up, and, you know, we have a much more kind of complicated, globalized field now, right? Like the wilderness is very complicated, and I liked how it interfered with ideas of shopping, you know, that maybe you could get your food in other ways, or you could learn things there. And so it was a kind of fun intervention into a few things. And
well, this piece also we're very lucky to have in the collection as well. So
yeah, I'm really so happy that this kind of strange ephemeral activity would be collected and kept at the museum. Like that really means a lot. And I got to repeat this gesture in New York City, and the New York Mycological Society. We did this during a snowstorm in the winter in Italian, Korean, Japanese, and Chinese and Japanese shops in Lower Manhattan. And Gary Linkoff, who is like famous, you know, wrote the National Audubon, recently departed. He did the big foray identification at a table where he talked about feeding stinkhorns to Margaret Thatcher. And, you know, we found, you know, caterpillar, a kind of fungus that infects caterpillars, and hedgehogs, and, you know, jelly ears, and all kinds of amazing species. I think we found, yeah, I don't know if I have the number here, but marvelous diversity of species, some of which, you know, my guidebook says are not edible. And, you know, it was just like a wonderful, and the New York Mycological Society liked this so much, they said they wanted to do it as a biannual event. I don't know if they do that, but that's fine by me. Yeah. And I'll just show you one other project that, you know, once I realized I could use these tools to inform artworks, I haven't stopped since then. And terrestrial celestial was a pretty important piece for me, and I'm still thinking about it. I decided to make a kind of composition of people, like in an event where we would learn everything. You know, I had been chatting with mushroomer friends, and my friend Alan told me this story that once he was mushrooming, you know, looking in the forest at the ground and doing what mushroomers do, and that they bumped into a group of birders. And the birders were walking through the forest like this and looking for birds, right? Probably stepping on a, and that really stayed in my mind, like just how much there was to know, like from earth to sky. And so I created this composition where in Vancouver, I invited the Vancouver Mycological Society and the Vancouver Astronomical Society to do a kind of exchange where we would look at mushrooms in the morning, and you know, the mushroomers would teach the astronomers, and then look at the stars at night, and the astronomers would teach the mushroomers. And so, you know, incredible to have a day without rain to base all this. You know, there were about 50 naturalists who came. I'll show you another image. Of course, like mycology, you know, not only did we sort of do earth and sky in one day, you know, it really came to be clear that like mycology is very like sensory and visceral, you know, things, you know, smell and taste, and they decay in a few hours, right? Astronomy, which I was less familiar with, is a whole other way of knowing. You know, you actually have to like do these feats of conceptualization where you like imagine you're looking back in time, and like the scale of things is so exceeding like normal, the distances and the numbers and things. And so, you know, both practices kind of in the same day, like starting with the body and ending with, you know, imagination, was like kind of an incredible spectrum of ways of knowing. And, you know, so grateful to these two groups for like having the humility to take turns, like being experts and amateurs. And it's funny seeing astronomers with big Tupperware and binoculars in the woods and stuff. And everything was, yeah, sort of two nerd cohorts.
I think, again, it ties back to this idea of questioning how we know things, or what it is that we know, and how we come to know what we know. Because when you end up being an expert in something, sometimes you kind of miss the big picture, you know, and you're telling that story of these sort of, so if you only look up, you're never going to look down. So it's this a little bit danger, if you like, if we specialize in something so particularly that we might actually miss the larger way in which everyone is connected. Ultimately, we are all connected. So this project really does that, really makes me think about it's a beautiful metaphor of sort of bringing these two really related things, as much as they're disparate, into kind of into collision, if you like. But literally they collided, but also in your work they collide. I know that we're also wanting to take some questions, but I know you also wanted to talk a little bit about your book project on the orchard. And the Orchard Project. So if you wanted to tell us a little bit about that, quickly, and then people can start to begin to share some questions. Sure. Hopefully for Diane, for us, for just ask us anything. I don't know anything about mushrooms, so Diane does. She'll answer all kinds of mushroom questions.
I'm cautious about identifying things online, but
it's true.
You know, so back in time, right now, I'm still working on this ongoing project that will probably, you know, started in 2019 called Orchard, which is an apple orchard as public art, and it will likely take the rest of my life and beyond to work on this project. And so this is a piece I made commissioned by the city of Mississauga Public Art, and, you know, was part of a project for the Toronto Biennial and Culture Days. So what I've done is became super obsessed with apples. You know, again, like mushrooms and other, you know, creatures, they're just full of stories in them. about our movement around the planet, you know, about settlement in North America, about our relationships to nature and to each other. And, you know, apples have to be grafted, right? They don't, you know, if all of the Granny Smith apples that you've ever eaten in your whole life, and me, they've all been clones. So when you have an apple varietal, it's kind of, you know, a stick is passed like a baton from orchardist to orchardist, like across generations. And so I started to get really excited about weird varieties of apples and eccentric things, historic apples, you know, unusual flavors and shapes and things. And so I found this amazing orchardist, Bill O'Keefe at O'Keefe Grange, who has like a museum of apples. You know, he's like a curator and very knowledgeable. And I worked with him to get a whole bunch of different apple varietals for this very special orchard as public art, and held a big apple tasting event where we tasted 40 different kinds of historic and unusual apples, and planted these trees. This is the orchard in the AV room, and there's these tiny baby trees. And I'm so happy that I just got to go back to the orchard a few weeks ago, and they made it through the winter. And it was such a relief, you know, to just think about trees. And, you know, when you talk to orchardists, they talk in terms of 5 years, 10 years, you know, which right now, like considering what we're going through, is such a nice thing to remember, like the future. And so that's a long ongoing project that I'm, you know, really excited about, and how it will, you know, support all kinds of activities and learning and, you know, gastronomical and aesthetic experiences later. And, you know, in the orchard in a few years, you'll be able to taste like a pink pearl, which has pink flesh and translucent skin, or a pineapple renette, which are these little golden suns of apples that taste like pineapple. There's Kandil Sinap, which is this beautiful Turkish apple that's very long and oval and looks like porcelain. I put in 2 historic, very rare Ontario apples, like one of which there's only one other tree that we know of in North America. So like a range of things for historic, eccentric, and you know, exciting when they're going to fruit and we'll be able to taste them. They're not the kind of apples you would find in the supermarket, like. And also right now and over the next year, luckily I have a project to work on in my office here, and that is I'm working on a publication with Ames Morel about all these kinds of environmental art practices and shows and, you know, curatorial projects and teaching and residencies that we've led, like one at Banff. You know, I've been doing things with students for the last decade, forays and bird tagging and mushrooming and petting bees and things like that. And finally, that's an image that I just love. When I look at it, it cheers me up entirely. This was from a residency that Amish and I with Tanya Willard led at the Banff Center for the Arts, called Outdoor School for Artists Working in Environmental Practices. And so this was a project that I created while I was there, inviting the math and physics researchers to swim with artists in the Bow River. And of course, it's very cold in Banff, and the Bow River is glacial. And so I cannot express how cold this was and how deliriously happy and amazed we were that artists and mathematicians would all come and swim together during a heat wave. And so perhaps I'll leave it there. Happy to take questions.
Well, it is absolutely amazing the way that you actually are able to bring people together and push them to do these things that if you were to just speak about the very end product, it would sound like just like a crazy activity, but you slowly take them on this journey, you know, and then you end up with mathematicians in a river, you know, like who knew?
It was almost impossible. I think it was partly so exhilarating and joyful because I didn't think it was going to work, but like a lot of pestering and pretty relentless. So,
right.
Yeah.
So I do have a couple of questions. So someone really wanted to know how you went about becoming a beekeeper.
A beekeeper. You know, it's interesting. Like, I love the bees. Like, I love the bees, like all beekeepers do, and they're marvelous and strange. And it's such a privilege to be close to them and to know their culture and be in their home and in their world. But I have to admit that I love food, and there's a guy in St. Lawrence Market who has a kiosk called Honey World, and I just have always loved visiting this Honey World because he has honey from all over the planet, He has a honeycomb. You know, if you stand there and chat with him and are ready to buy an expensive jar of honey, he'll let you taste 20, 30 kinds of like terroir, like land. You know, you can taste what these medicinal flowers from New Zealand, or taste, you know, bees that are collecting nectar from orange groves in Italy, or lavender fields in France, or sunflowers, you know. And so I found this just so awesome, that like honey could express the landscape from all over the world, and all these millions of flowers, like the essence of all these flowers. Honey just blew my mind, and I think that was actually what prompted the beekeeping. And I took, my dad is also interested in animals and creatures and, you know, agricultural practices. And so the two of us, me and my dad, took a class together in Guelph, and we started keeping bees together. And, you know, we fight all the time, but because we have different ways of working, but he's learned that you have to obey the bees. That's basically the safest way to do it.
I think we'll take one more question. Someone would like to know how all of these different collaborators that you've had have responded to your work. How do they feel, or do they share their feelings of being part of your work, but also just in response to it?
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. Throughout my practices like these with lots of other people, it's never really been very important to me that they know, like what they think of them as artworks, you know, because, you know, we're all from different, you know, astronomers, or, you know, mushroomers, or, you know, whoever, you know, the mathematicians. Like, I think that I try and create activities that might just be intrinsically enjoyable or interesting, or, you know, just a small twist of what they might ordinarily expect to do. And so, you know, there are a lot of, you know, there's usually a lot of time, you know, you're walking around with people or swimming to kind of talk about the experience. And, you know, there can be a range of things, but I learn a lot from everyone's, you know, insights and way into these things too.
Well, I have to say that maybe perhaps with the exception of the clouds, there is food in all of your art. In the mushrooms, in the honey, in the apples, you know. And as we're kind of all thinking about all the different things people are trying and cooking, I think that that's another vein that we would be able to explore your work through the whole idea of food preparation, and in fact how that is a whole other way to understand the world. In that, as you spoke so beautifully about honey, you get to know a place through taste, not often a way in which we encourage our visitors to our museum to experience art.
Yeah,
You know.
I think that's why, in a way, sometimes like white galleries and things are, I'm just too, I just want to taste and smell and feel things. And I know there's so much meaning and, you know, experience and intelligence in these things.
I want to thank you so much, Diane, for joining us. You've made me intensely more curious about the world that we at this time cannot go and visit, and also deeply hungry.
You can still see the flowers, you know, you can,
no, it's
I just
so
did
beautiful.
a walk, and there's magnolia at least right now.
Yeah, and we're actually
they're
noticing.
Not canceled.
No. And we're noticing things that you may not notice if you are always running for the bus or getting somewhere. You know, it kind of forces us to take the time and notice things that actually offer such beauty and such joy.
Yeah.
And so we're very lucky that way.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Georgiana.
Thank you, Diane. Always lovely to speak with you. And thank you very much to everyone for joining us. We're going to have lots more events. You can always check out all kinds of social media platforms and also agio.ca. So thank you, Diane, again. And thank you, everyone. And have a wonderful rest of your day.